Hello and welcome to Write Asylum, the self-publishing podcast with myself, Emily Walker, and K.N. Lee. Today,
Hello.
there's K.N. Today we are going to dive into K.N.'s psyche and figure out what her first draft process is. So it ought to be really exciting. We're going to do this in kind of a two-part podcast. Hers is going to be this one, and then we'll try and dive into what my first draft process is in the next episode. But before we get started on jumping into that, we'll just talk a little bit about any news that we have, publishing or otherwise. Anything going on in your life?
Oh, yeah. Wow, 2016 is already super incredible. So I have a series called The Euro Chronicles, and Rise of the Flame came out last year with Book Trope. And this year I'm putting out the sequel, so I literally just sent that to the editor today. So all of the people that have been writing me on my fan page about when is it going to come out, and everyone that's been writing me on Twitter, it should be out within the next month or two. So I'm really excited about that, and that means that I can now focus on the third Chronicles of Koa book called Iranian Blade. And yeah, we've been waiting for that one for a while too, so I'm really excited to put that out. So that's what's going on in my writer life. Of course, I've already started plotting out a few other books. So 2016 is going to be incredible. One every 3 months. That's the goal.
That's a good goal.
Thank you. What about yourself?
I am working on the sequel to my zombie novel. It's called Zombie Face, so I'm trying to put as much effort into that as I can, on top of also, going to school and work and ghostwriting and all the other insane things I do. So it's going to be a busy 2016 for me as well, and I have a lot of plans. So I'm hoping to have a good production schedule and keep to it. But as well as I do, that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, that's the key, is keeping to the schedule.
I'm trying to get a little more organized. I've got a calendar online where I put everything. I'm trying to figure out my life in my brain, and
Yeah.
it's hot. And also the Panthers are in the playoffs today, so I'm sporting this giant jersey.
Oh, yeah. Go Panthers.
So, I guess we will just go ahead and just jump right into talking about your mind and
Okay.
talking about how your first draft process works. And we want to start with the very beginning, forming the idea for your novels.
Okay, yeah, this is a great topic because I literally woke up this morning before we even thought about the topic, and it was in my head. I put a post on my fan page about why writers should write their first draft longhand, like in a notebook or somewhere like that, because that's what I do. I, sometimes I go back and forth between having a notebook and writing longhand and typing, but I always preferred writing in a notebook to anything because it somehow, the creative process is a lot better that way. And I'm not sure why that is, but just to have your notebook with you at all times, like I always have one in my purse. And if I forget to have one in my purse, or it doesn't fit for some reason, I have a few apps to, write down notes. What's one of them? Wordsmith is a good app for writing down notes and keeping track of your ideas. Or you can use Siri and dictate it to yourself, email it to yourself, text it to yourself. Don't let those ideas go to waste.
For sure. Because if you don't get them down, then they definitely go away.
That's the worst, is when you cannot remember. But one thing about me that I talked about in one of my blogs is I've been keeping a dream journal since high school. So I've kind of done this thing where I looked it up, and it's real. Lucid dreaming. Like, I can have an idea and think about it before I go to sleep. Or even if I'm having trouble with a plot, I will think about it before I go to sleep. And in my dreams, I will work that plot out. First chapter, of her, in her living room ordering a pizza, and the pizza guy trying to harm her, and realizing that he picked on the wrong girl. This was all a dream that I had.
Wow.
And yeah.
Just to frame it a little bit, was that your first novel that you wrote, or?
That was the first one that I published. It was not the first one that I wrote, but it was the first one that I published, because Rise of the Flame was the first book I wrote. I was 11 years old. I did the second draft in my 20s, and I wanted to pitch that to agents and publishers, and I knew that would be a long process. So I wrote up the Chronicles of Koa so that I could quench my urge to have something published. So that's how that happened.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So basically, when I start a story, it usually starts with a dream. And if it doesn't start with a dream and it's just like an idea, I will do a jot list. I learned this in elementary school. I was in a writer group called the Writer's Tea, and we would get out a piece of paper, and we would just write anything that popped into our head. And then we would like circle which things really interested us or what we can really write something about. So I would have an idea, and I would write all the different ways that this idea could form into a good story. Like I would do scenes that I could write, how the ending would go, what characters would be part of the story. And then once I have that and I figure out which characters I like and what plot I want to go with, I'll do character profiles so that I know what they look like, what their personalities are like, what their driving forces are, like what drives them in the story. So yeah, I'll do that, and I don't always do an outline. Most of the time, I literally just write the first scene that comes into my head, and that always, always somehow ends up being the ending of my story. So,
Okay.
yeah, because there's always a really big climax, and I'm like, well, how did we get there? So I'm always writing backwards. Yeah, and I've had a few authors tell me that they do the same thing. Like you have this story, and then you realize, wait a minute, that is the ending of the story. Like whatever comes after this is the next book. So I need to go back and write, how did we get here? So, I mean, not everyone works that way. I don't know. I just have a visual mind where whatever I write just feels like a movie. And for me, I like a movie that is, that hooks you, and it's like action, and that's just how I do it. But so I have my notebook. Um, I start writing out the character profiles, a style sheet with what kind of powers the people have, and because sometimes you can go back and you have to look at it yourself because you'll forget. You'll forget sometimes what these different. If like you're like me and you make your own races and stuff like that, you'll forget sometimes what they can do.
Right.
And just to keep it, yeah.
Dictionary for while you're writing your series. You need to have like a glossary to go back and check with.
Yes, that's something that one of my first editors suggested that I do for Rise of the Flame. And I see that in Mistborn, one of my favorite books by Brandon Sanderson, he has a really good style sheet as well about what the different types of power are and what makes them, what fuels them and things like that. So, I mean, it's just good to have all of these things. So I have like so many notebooks of just notes and outlines and everything. So once I start the story, I always like to start with that first page has to grip the reader. Like I read a few articles and I agree with this. You never want to start with the weather or
Roll.
yeah, exactly. Like that's something that'll get you put in the slush pile instantly. You want to start with action, that like put them right in the middle so that they want to know, how did you get there and where are you going? So my stories always start with that first line has to catch you. And it's usually in the middle of an action or some kind of tension. And so, yeah, all of your paragraphs from that first one on should drive the story.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, and so, like, each chapter starts with the hook and ends with the hook. So that, end with something that makes you question what's going to happen next, so that the reader will go to that next chapter. You want your story to form in a way that after each chapter, they cannot go to sleep because they want to read that next chapter.
That's really nice. It's kind of like
Yeah.
when you watch a episode of a show, like your favorite show, and you've been watching it for a while, and you've been reading those chapters, and you get to that episode where it leaves you this horrible lurch until next season.
Exactly.
You definitely want to be able to hold their attention. And I read something somewhere recently that said take out all the boring parts, the parts that the reader's going to skip over. Just make everything in your book matter, and that's really hard to do sometimes.
Yeah, it is, especially when you're so close to it, because it's your baby, and all of those words were hard to get out.
That's true.
So,
That's true.
yeah. So it really is hard to go back and scratch them out sometimes. But what I learned from Stephen King's On Writing, and it really works, is to, when you finish, like once you get everything done and you finish it, put it in a drawer or somewhere for like 2 weeks and don't touch it.
Yeah.
Because that takes you away from it being so personal and in the moment that when you go back, it's so easy to just read through and like, that paragraph really wasn't that great. I can, fix it or just delete it, and it's just so much easier that way.
Kill your darling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Always hard. I'm reading the Charlie Davidson series. I'm actually not reading it. I'm listening to it because I'm
Oh,
always doing stuff. And she just killed like my soul in this last book. So she's definitely killing her darling. She does not hesitate to do that.
oh yeah.
So so basically we're not the first draft yet. Basically we've started with your idea forming and kind of your lucid dreaming, which is really cool. I don't think we'll have to get into that some other time. I haven't heard of anybody doing that. So right now we're at the point where you started to outline things, you started to turn things over in your mind. From the moment that you start planning, when do you start actually writing?
Well, once I have that idea, like even if I'm, just writing out the notes and everything, that's part of the writing process because a lot of those notes will become scenes. Me personally, when I start my first draft, I start with the scenes. I start with the first chapter and I write all of the different scenes that I know that I want to see and I know that will get us to the climax at the end of the story. And once I do that, that's when I go back and I work on my transitions and I pull everything together so that it all flows and it's all connected. So, yeah, that's basically how I write a story. And if I get stuck, that's when I'll go back and I'll rework the outline and make sure that everything is heading in the right direction and has a point in the story. But yeah, that's pretty much how I do my first draft. It's all about getting those scenes out, making sure I sit down and not get intimidated by the story. If I feel kind of lost somewhere, I'll just move on to another scene and work on it, and then I'll put it all together in the end.
That's good. That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you've started writing and you're going through and you're starting your first draft. How much are you one of those authors who goes and like tries to self-edit as you go, or do you just go and not worry about it as much until you go back through that first draft?
You know what? I started off as one of those authors, and it took me so much longer to get a story finished because every time I would sit down, I would go back to the beginning and I would go through every paragraph and I would, make all these edits, and then I would end up with too many edits that I need to go fix something else in the story, and it's like a never-ending cycle. Like if you cut something out somewhere, you have to fix it in another place. So now my writing speed has like tripled because I just want to get the story out. Like I just go, 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 go. Because when you do your next draft, you're gonna have to do that anyway. And when I'm writing in a notebook, when I type it up, that's when I'm doing my edits. As I type it up, I can fix things that way. So that's why I like to do longhand first, because when you go back to type it up, it is tedious, but it always comes out better because that's basically your second draft.
Right. Well, that's a good way to look at it. And I think also a good thing about writing longhand is when we're on our computers, we have a ton of distractions. Even if you use that like social media block or whatever, if you're kind of like sitting down and writing in a notebook, then you are really focused. And if I'm on my computer typing, I might be trying to do 700 other things.
So true.
So that's when you start your first draft and you start doing your longhand, about how long do you work on it per day?
Wow, that's changed since I had a baby.
Of course.
I used to write literally from the time I woke up to the time I went to sleep before I got married and had a baby. Like when I was single, like my days would just be writing. Like honestly, I'd wake up, pick up my laptop, and I'd just be working on different stories, or I'd get my notebook and I would go through like a whole one subject notebook in like hours. That's just how I used to do it. But now I'm writing from roughly 6:30 to midnight.
Okay, and that's at night?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm sure it changes a lot when you change your lifestyle for sure. And on my end, I work full time, so I just kind of have to squeeze it in when I can. And that's one thing about trying to have like a schedule put in place. It could change any time, so you kind of have to be flexible. So so how long since you write less now because you have more responsibilities and everything like that, how long does it take you to finish your first draft?
A month.
A month?
Yes.
That's still good.
Yeah. Thank you.
No, I mean, that's still good. People write at different speeds, and I know with me, like, my brain kind of sometimes takes off on a different tangent, and I have to go back and figure out what I'm doing.
Yeah.
How many, do you just do one at a time, pretty much?
No. I could probably produce a lot more if I didn't have a million ideas in my head that are all fighting for their spotlight.
I know.
Yeah, like every given day, unless I have a deadline, I pretty much sit down and like, who is shouting at me the loudest right now? And when I say who, I'm talking about the characters in my head that are all begging for their chance.
No.
Yeah.
I do most of my thinking, like most of my plotting and like coming up with ideas in the shower.
Yeah.
Always when I'm in the shower, like, I don't know why, it's just always in the shower, like or right before I go to sleep when I'm like almost comatose and can't write things down. That's when I have like an idea. You've written your first draft, and that's what this whole podcast is about. We're just going into how you write your first draft. So let's look at it from before you start editing. Do you actually put it down for 2 weeks, or is that just something that you'd like to do?
No, I do because if I don't, like I said, it's hard. You hold on to every word so hard, and it actually works out well for me to put it down and forget about it for a while to give my brain a break,
Right.
so that I can and then in that 2 weeks I'm just working on something else. So it's like a constant rotation of manuscripts.
Okay, that makes sense. And
yeah.
Do you have, because you are with a publisher and also self-published, so do you have deadlines with your publisher that you have to meet?
Well, right now I have like a rough deadline. for Night of the Storm, which is a sequel to Rise of the Flame, and Lyrenian Blade, because those are the two stories that I am publishing with my publisher.
Okay.
But when I get into like a multi-author project, like the one that we just finished with Woodland Creek, that was a deadline that I knew I had to make because I did not want to get kicked out. There were serious consequences there, so I put everything aside to work on the Scarlet Legacy, and so that I could make sure I had it ready for pre-order and had it ready for release. Because
it's amazing.
So there are
deadlines like that can really put you in the motion. I was the same way with Trajectory, which was the same.
Yeah.
So I knew I had to get it out. It had to be done for sure.
Okay. And
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say that deadlines can both help and hinder the creative process. Like sometimes, like I find out when there's like, and this is like a scientifically proven thing. Like when there's stress, you work better, which is crazy.
That's absolutely true. Like in any sense of the word, whether it's your regular job or writing or whatever you're doing, when you have a deadline or you have to get it done or there's consequences, you definitely work better. Your mind kind of takes over a little bit and helps get that process of get that across. So when you're in your first draft, and say you've written the whole thing longhand, you got your notebooks, you're done, you waited your 2 weeks, you're back in it, and you're making edits. Any plot changes happen? Do new characters come? Characters go? Like, what's your editing? Like, what's your brain do when you pick up that first draft?
Yeah, almost every time there's some kind of change that happens that it always makes it better though. Sometimes it might make it a little confusing in the beginning and make it harder to edit it because either I add a character or I take one out, so I have to go back and make sure that everything makes sense without this character. But yeah, when I go back and I start typing up from chapter 1 to the ending, sometimes one of the characters will do something that completely surprises me but enters the story. Yeah, they do that.
I know.
They're notorious for doing that. And it does make an impact on the story, but that's why it makes it better. There's some things that you didn't notice when you were doing it longhand. There might be some symbolism that you didn't catch until you went back and typed it up and went through the second draft. Like there might, like sometimes this happens a lot where there's like, I don't know, there might be like some dialogue that had like a deeper meaning now that you know what the ending is.
Right.
And you want to go back and try to play that up a little bit. So you see a lot of surprises when you go and type up your first draft.
Just to recap a little bit, first draft for you is most definitely longhand. Takes about a month, and you're not really a plotter, but you're not completely a pantser. You're kind of in the middle. So, I guess, is there anything else that you'd like to enlighten the listeners with about writing first draft? Any tips? Or I know you said that you use, what was the app you said you used?
Wordsmith on my iPhone. I use that. IA Writer is another good one. But you don't even need that all the time. Wordsmith is cool because it'll send you a reminder each day it's time to write, which is really cool. Yeah.
Okay, and then, if there's just anything else that you would like to say about the Psyche of K.N. Lee, you go right ahead.
Okay, just for anyone that wants to write a book, the best advice that I can give you is to either set a word quota per day or a time quota per day, and no matter what, just try to stick to it, and don't get caught up on anything like, writer's block or anything like that. Just sit down and try to get it out, as quickly or as efficiently as you can, and then worry about the editing later.
That's good.
Thank you.
And I know we're supposed to do a marketing tip per episode, so do you have
Okay.
a marketing tip for our listeners?
Today, since we're talking about drafts, this tip is not really marketing, but it's a good tip. If you're not a fan of longhand or anything like that, and you do want to start a book, I just started trying out Scrivener. Uh, it's a writing software, and
I love Scrivener.
yeah, I would say it's not really expensive or anything, and they have sales most of the time. I got mine on sale. Try that out. You can keep all of your research in one place, all of your chapters in one place, and all of your notes. And if you're like a visual person, then that might work for you. If you don't want to try something like that, then just make sure you have a fresh notebook in with you at all times and a pen.
Okay. I know next week when we talk about my draft process, we'll definitely be talking about Scrivener because I love Scrivener for sure.
Oh my gosh, I'm sure people are going to love that because there's a lot of tutorials and we're going to need your insight.
I'm definitely not perfect at it, and I definitely only use the basics, but
yeah,
for sure. My marketing tip would probably be along the same lines of first draft. If you want to share what you're doing, you can always maybe have first chapter written and put that disclaimer on there if you share it on your blog or something, unedited, first draft, subject to change, that kind of thing. If you want to try and drum up interest in your story, but don't be so focused on the fact that it might change, or if if you're not somebody who wants to share something until it's completely done, then you can wait. But I know that it's important to try and drum up some interest before you release. So if you want to share, or even if you just want to share with like a critique group or your beta readers or something like that, just to kind of get some encouragement, get some feedback, you don't have to quite worry that it's not perfect yet, because it can always change. As long as you're not publishing it, then it can always, and even then it can change, but it's probably best that it doesn't. You just need to let it go. But yeah, so I would say sharing your first chapter is a great way to get people to kind of get interested in what you're writing and what you're going to put out there.
that's a great tip. Yeah, I agree with that. Little known fact: the Chronicles of Koa, what started off as a chapter per week on my blog.
That's cool. And like Andy Weir, the guy who wrote The Martian,
Yeah.
all on his blog, he wrote it each week, and then people were like, "Well, we like this, but we'd like to see it, in ebook form." And then he took it off from there. So
I love it. Success story.
So I think that about does it for our first episode. Thank you so much, everybody who's listening or watching, since we are also on YouTube if you'd like to see our pretty faces. And I lost my train of thought.
It happens.
Sure. But
speaking of pretty faces, Emily looks great today.
thank you so much.
Every day.
Wonderful.
You're welcome.
Always look good.
Thank you.
But so that was K.N. Lee's first draft process. And if you have any questions, for sure tweet her or leave us questions on the video, or we're going to post a blog post about where the podcast will be uploaded. So you can definitely go and start listening to it. And we'll see you next week.
Adios.